Over the last century, as pop culture has spread through almost every continent and culture, our world has become increasingly star-obsessed. We have collectively elevated the individuals who have managed to capture the camera's eye to a level akin to living, breathing deities, with hordes of devotees and detractors analyzing their every step. As technology has advanced, so has our access to these idols and icons. Now the lives of these stars are on full display as they marry or divorce, flourish or fail, slip into madness, or experience a spiritual awakening. Despite being removed and ill-informed observers, the world's audience delights in judging these stars' lives and critiquing their every element as if they were watching a Hollywood drama. One of these storylines that has captivated the public in the last few years was the sudden change in behavior of the world-renowned actor and comedian Jim Carrey. To some, this divergence in character seemed crazy. To others, it seemed enlightened. Whether this was a kind of manic episode or a significant spiritual awakening is not something that can be determined by the public or possibly even Jim Carrey himself. However, regardless of whatever label is used to describe this behavior change, the message that Jim Carrey now uses his platform to spread is reminiscent of some of the ideas that the most notable religious figures and philosophers have taught throughout history. Jim Carrey grew up idolizing his father, who he described as a captivating character who could have had fabulous success as a comedian. However, being fearful of the instability and risky nature of pursuing a career in the arts, his father found work as an accountant to provide for Jim and his 3 brothers. Despite his belief that taking this job would be the financially responsible decision, Carrey's father was laid off, and the family went through a brief period of homelessness. This experience was very impactful for Carrey. He said that seeing his father go through this taught him that, as he puts it, you might fail at doing something you don't want to do, so you might as well try doing something you love. He took this lesson to heart, and as a teenager set his mind on becoming one of the best actors and comedians of all time. Carrey has on many occasions spoken about the power of the mind and how he always felt that he had an uncanny ability to manifest things in his life.
In my own ability to manifest things, insane a belief, that I think it's ultimately complete sanity, but I believe we're creators, and I believe we create with every thought and every word. Every moment is pregnant with the next moment of your life.
A notable example of this is that at the age of 23, Jim Carrey, who at the time was a struggling performer, wrote himself a check for $10 million, dated it Thanksgiving 1995, and specified that it was to be for acting services rendered. This check sat in Carrey's wallet until just before Thanksgiving of 1995, when he received a contract to star in the comedy hit Dumb and Dumber, for which he was paid a fee of $10 million.
And I dated it Thanksgiving 1995, and I put it in my wallet, and I kept it there, and it deteriorated and stuff. But then, just before Thanksgiving 1995, I found out that I was going to make $10 million on, I think it was Dumb and Dumber, maybe.
Dumb and Dumber, yeah.
Yeah.
Carrey also spoke about the power of visualization and said that long before he found any mainstream success, he would park every night on the top of Mulholland Drive in Los Angeles and visualize being respected by his idols and having all the top directors wanting to work with him. He believed that these practices of manifestation and visualization were a major part in helping him attain great success. Soon he was known worldwide for playing some of the most notorious and beloved characters in the history of Hollywood. However, around the turn of the century, Jim Carrey took on the task of portraying the famous so-called anti-comedian Andy Kaufman in the biopic Man on the Moon, that his life changed forever. Throughout the filming of the movie, Carrey used an intense form of method acting to embody the character of Andy Kaufman. This entailed him always portraying either Kaufman or Kaufman's infamous alter ego, Tony Clifton, regardless of whether or not the cameras were rolling. In talking about the experience, Carrey recalls a moment when he was sitting alone on a beach and the spirit of Andy Kaufman showed up, tapped him on the shoulder and told him, "Sit down, I'll be doing my movie." Carrey said that everything from that moment on was out of his control. As he continued to disappear more and more into the character and life of Andy Kaufman, he began to find it increasingly difficult to identify with his own persona of Jim Carrey.
Where I found myself subjugating Jim Carrey for Andy Kaufman and Tony Clifton, and then at the end of it looking for Jim Carrey again and having trouble finding him. And at a certain point, I realized, hey, wait a second, if it's so easy to lose Jim Carrey, who the hell is Jim Carrey?
After this first experience of a dramatic shift in egoic foundation and attachment, Carrey would go on to have a series of what he would call awakenings. He has said that while to some these moments or changes would look like bouts of depression, he believed grief and sadness were his ticket home. This is not a novel idea. Sadness and suffering has long been spoken of by spiritual masters as a powerful tool that can be used to reconnect with your deepest self. In fact, the modern spiritual teacher Eckhart Tolle writes in his book The Power of Now that his enlightenment came about while in the midst of a deep depressive episode. But Eckhart is far from the only teacher to talk about the power of sadness and despair. The mystic Sufi poet Rumi wrote, "Don't turn away. Keep your gaze on the bandaged place. That's where the light enters you." The Christian mystic St. John taught that in the dark night of the soul, bright flows the river of God. And the Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh explains this principle as the mud of life is where the lotus flower of peace blooms. All of these teachings point exactly towards what Carrey expressed, that it is often in the most difficult times that we find salvation and our way back to our true selves. Carrey would also go on to talk in depth about how he began to see his suffering as a spiritual challenge that offered him two options. The first option was to give in to resentment, which he believes leads to vengeance, harm to others, and harm to one's self. The second option was to walk the path of forgiveness, which leads to grace. He attributed this to the journey of Christ on the cross and spoke to his belief that it is our duty to embrace our suffering and find forgiveness for the people and situations that cause it. While many people saw this change of character and new spiritual messages as beautiful evolutions of a thoughtful artist, others perceived it as a kind of manic episode, ripe with sanctimony and delusion. There were certain interviews that Carrey did during this time that were thought to be obvious displays of a man not ascending to enlightenment, but rather slipping into lunacy. As Jim Carrey's behavior started to shift, much of the public and the media began to express their concern. Certain public appearances where he appeared somewhat erratic and acted strangely led people to fear that he was losing grip on his sanity. For example, in an appearance on the Jimmy Fallon Show, Jim Carrey went after Hollywood and consumerist culture, claiming that the Illuminati were using these tools to control the general public.
Is that a gang sign? Have you,
Oh, like you don't know what it is. You don't know what that is.
I have no idea.
You don't know. Jimmy Fallon doesn't know. David Letterman doesn't. For years now, talk show hosts, people on television, people in sitcoms have been hired by the government to throw you off the track, to distract you, to make you laugh and stuff like that, make you happy and docile so you don't know what's really going on.
This wasn't the only outing that raised some eyebrows. A particularly odd red carpet interview at the New York Fashion Week showed Carrey spinning around, talking about how neither he nor the interviewer existed and claiming that nothing mattered.
There's no me.
There's no you.
No.
We're not here. This is a dream?
There's just things happening. And there are clusters of tetrahedrons moving around together.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what's happening in our world right now? Because there is a lot of news that actually is relevant that's not that
Here's
uplifting.
the thing. It's not our world.
None
That's
of
the
this is
key.
real?
Nope.
These strange appearances caused many people to start questioning Carrey's sanity. Various articles and videos were published on whether or not the actor had begun to go crazy, or whether this type of behavior should be expected from such an avant-garde performer. The definitive answer to these speculations is unattainable, but considering Carrey claimed this new behavior was in direct response to the spiritual awakenings he was undergoing around this time, it is interesting to compare it to the experiences of other people who have gone through similar transformations. For example, the mystic yogi Gopi Krishna experienced a spontaneous Kundalini awakening, which caused him to at first believe he was going mad. His experience was so overwhelming and intense that he began to doubt his sanity, writing, "For a time I was afraid I was going crazy and would end up in a lunatic asylum." Other legendary mystics like St. Francis of Assisi and Ramakrishna Paramhansa were also thought to be insane by their contemporaries. Therefore, it is not abnormal for people going through intense spiritual transformation to appear odd or begin to act in extremely different ways. This is not to say that Carrey's strange behavior is a direct sign that he has experienced a spiritual awakening. However, it is important to take this into consideration when it may be easiest to dismiss his peculiar change in character as someone losing their sanity. It is fitting and fascinating that a man who became famous for taking on the personas of others would come to struggle so much with his own identity. While somewhat ironic, it is not surprising that someone with such a fluid persona would begin to probe the problem of selfhood. It is also not surprising that this would correspond to a spiritual experience, considering that a focus of every major religion is concerned with the proper understanding of self. The examples of this are endless. Lao Tzu, the founder of Taoism, wrote, "Knowing others is intelligence. Knowing yourself is true wisdom." The Bhagavad Gita teaches, "True knowledge is to seek the self. To seek anything else is ignorance." The Prophet Muhammad said, "He who knows himself knows God." Jesus instructed his disciples, saying, "Examine yourself and understand who you are. Whoever does not know self does not know anything, but whoever knows self has acquired the knowledge of the universe." Carrey made a whole career of creating and becoming different people, but as he went further and further into these characters, he started to see his own identity as no different from his cinematic creations. What surprised him as he began to explore the notion of self further is that the person he thought he was beyond all these fictionalized portrayals was actually just another manufactured identity that didn't truly represent his innermost self.
I don't exist. So they're all characters that I played, including Jim Carrey, including Joel Barish, including any of those things. They're all characters. Jim Carrey was a less intentional character because I thought I was just building something that people would like, but it was a character.
The philosophical entertainer Alan Watts spoke to this mystery of self often and to our collective propensity to get completely confused by it. In one of his lectures, Watts mentions how the word person, coming from the Latin word persona, which referred to the masks that ancient actors wore on stage to help project their voices to the audience. Now we use the word persona to refer to the personality that we project to others. It is this socially driven personality that Carrey said he realized was a complete farce that he had constructed to put himself and others at ease. He described the feeling of keeping up this persona as him attempting to display himself as the great and powerful Wizard of Oz, but instead truly feeling like the small sweaty man behind the curtain rushing around pulling levers to keep up appearances. As he began to awaken to the realization that his entire being was far greater than the manufactured persona he believed himself to be, he experienced a radical shift in identity.
I saw that I was bigger than what I do. I was bigger than my body. I was everything and everyone. I was no longer a fragment of the universe. I was the universe.
This radical expansion of self, described by Carrey, is perfectly summarized in the beautiful Hindu phrase, Tat Tvam Asi. This translates to, Thou art that, meaning the things that we do not normally conceive of as part of ourselves are only separate from us in relation to the small isolated persona we identify ourselves with. Truly knowing ourselves is seeing that we are much more than this tiny fragmented conception of self, and that our true being emanates from and is entangled with the entire universe. Carrey spoke to this exact feeling during an appearance on the Jimmy Kimmel Show.
You know, Jim Carrey is a great character, and I was lucky to get the part. But I don't think of that as me anymore.
You don't? Not at all?
Not really, no. I used to be a guy who was experiencing the world, and now I feel like the world and the universe experiencing a guy.
This change of perspective is one that is spoken about by many people who have gone through great spiritual transformation. As Eckhart Tolle puts it, you're not in the universe. You are the universe, an intrinsic part of it. Ultimately, you're not a person, but a focal point where the universe is becoming conscious of itself. Carrey seems to have realized this within himself and is now set on utilizing his massive platform to spread this message. For years, the one-of-a-kind actor used comedy to bring people joy and relief. Now, Carrey is using the wisdom that has finally allowed him to feel the same joy and relief to continue to help people around the world.
Rama Rama ratte ratte betere umariya Rama Rama ratte ratte betere umariya Raghu